All right. Hi, Gabe. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So let me share this video or this presentation. Let's see here. So hello, my name is Gabe Silva. I am the CEO of Manasec, and we do business consulting, IT services, cybersecurity, governance, risk, and compliance. And we are basically here to be your trusted advisor. Um, so let me get to the right screen. All right, here we go. Um, So we're going to talk about cybersecurity and risk management. I'm going to leave you with some skills, some risk management skills to assess risk in your business and some top 5 things you can do to protect your business and try to keep it simple as possible for you, but enough information to go back and kind of redigest it. Um, can you guys see the next screen?
Yes.
Icebreaker? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So let's go over a couple things. So SMB suffered cyber extortion attacks 4.2 times more often than larger enterprises, with a 77% year-over-year increase, which means it's just increasing at an alarming rate. As businesses get more intertwined with technology, more reliant on it, they're going to be increased amount of attacks. 46.15% rise in attacks compared to 2023, and that just keeps going up and up and up. And so a couple questions that I usually ask when I'm in a live audience is, have you ever experienced a cyber attack, or are you prepared, or what concerns you? These are all things to think about and just get ahead of it before it happens. Do you have your business documentation, ready? If you got into an incident, what are you going to do? Do you know where all your passwords are? Or what happens if you lose an employee that's responsible for all your networks or your technology, or maybe a certain process in your business? Maybe it's not even technology related, right? We rely on our team members. So those are things to think about in risk management. One of the things that happens a lot is for small and medium-sized businesses, so preoccupied with other things and nothing ever happens. So we just think we're too small. We're not going to get, hit by a cyber attack. We don't have any data. But being on the front line, just like police officers, they see crime every single day. If you're in cybersecurity industry, you will see this happens all the time. And we see right here, there's a furniture industry, and they wouldn't necessarily, you wouldn't think that they're, technology oriented, but they were impacted by a data breach. Um, and their employees' information, their clients' information, that was all breached. So it can happen to you whether you have a lot of technology or not. And it's not related to just technology. You have files and filing cabinets. I was just explaining to Rachel before the meeting that, we had a client that they didn't think that they needed cybersecurity, and the police showed up and they had arrested one of their employees and found all their employees' information and their clients' information, and they were committing fraud. So it can happen to you. And so just identifying risks and mitigating them ahead of time is going to save a lot of money. Just to kind of go into a little bit further, most of America, most people in America work for small, medium-sized businesses. Small, medium businesses are like the backbone of America, and 43% of cyber attacks target them. The average SMB cost is 120,000, and so that number can be much higher or lower, but the average from 0 or 1 employee to 1,000 employees, that's going to vary, but they did an average and it can be in the millions or lower, but 120,000 is the average. And why do they attack small, medium-sized businesses? Because they know that most of them don't have a budget for cybersecurity or risk management. There's not really a culture that's like security aware or risk aware. And then, they also don't have the budget for, expertise. Not a lot of SMBs don't have cybersecurity expert or risk management expert on board. They might not even have cyber insurances and the defenses that come with it. So that's something to think about. As I said, we're going to talk more about risk from a risk lens than cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is one subset of risk, right? Cybersecurity is business risk, but we need to look at all the business risk. A lot of the times, cybersecurity gets pushed to the side because there's a lot of other things. You know, a business is worried about achieving its objectives and being efficient and running lean and maximizing profits, and that can be difficult, but it's often overlooked. As a business owner, we encounter all different kinds of risks. So assessing and managing the risk is a great skill to have, and so that's kind of what I'm going to focus on, is teach you how to assess and manage your risk, and then we'll go more into the cyber part of it. So this systematic process is important, because if we just come to a situation where we're just like plugging holes in our boat, we could miss places. There can be gaps in our security, and we could spend money on one solution without the greater picture, and then have to come back and redo that solution. So it saves money because it helps you look long term into what you're trying to achieve as a project. So it's going to be used more than cybersecurity for marketing and sales, investment opportunities. Maybe you want to sell your business down the road. So it's just really good to have everything in line and running. Or maybe you want to offer a warranty or a discount. So knowing the risk of how many products are going to be returned or whatnot, that's all calculated. And all the giant corporations do this, so that way they know exactly how much they stand to lose if a risk materializes. Looking at some impacts of risk, what can happen. So customer trust and reputation damage. You can lose money because people aren't buying your product, or maybe your business is down. Maybe your operations are down. Maybe some of your assets are stolen, or maybe they just break or they need to be fixed. And you might lose resources. That's a risk too. We just talked about losing an employee that's like the backbone of your company, your go-getter. So that's something to think about. And then we also have compliance risks, where it's a whole other thing, laws that you have to follow to protect data, or regulations you have to meet with some of your projects and things that you're working on. And so that can lead to fines and legal issues, or maybe inefficient processes and lack of insight can cost you money, because you have all this data, but you're not using it efficiently. So you risk making bad decisions. So these are all things that are impacts of risk, but they all can also be causes of risk. Risk and compliance are managed by governance. So we're going to take a look at how to manage this all. Governance, risk, and compliance. It's a method that where you align your IT and your business strategy and manage your risk, so you can meet all the requirements that your business needs to uphold. For instance, if you sell things online and you collect money digitally, that's going to fall under PCI DSS. Or if you have health information in your health provider, that falls under HIPAA law. So how do we achieve our business goal and make sure we use technology to make our processes more efficient, to support those goals we're trying to achieve, while also meeting regulations? So that's what GRC, governance, risk, and compliance is. It's strategy, policy, leadership, identifying risks, and assessing the impact of those risks, and then documenting them and tracking your progress towards those objectives. So good governance, risk, and compliance. What does it do for you? It does so much for your business, because you can retain talent, right? Because you have a good culture, right? Better culture, you can retain talent, you can make better quality products, you can save your money and maximize your profit. And it's more efficient for your business to run with a systematic process. With GRC program in place, your business is going to be streamlined. You know where your data is at, you're controlling it, you're protecting it, and you can use it for more insightful decision making. Just like we talked about that. Protects customer data, and it builds trust with your customers, because you're on top of stuff. Prevents financial losses from breaches, avoids legal and regulatory penalties, and it strengthens your business reputation. It's really important to understand how the systematic process works. So we're going to talk about some of these systems that have been developed. A few of them are NIST, ISO, and CIS, and we'll go into some of these. I'm not sure if you may or may not have heard of them, but chances are, if you have a cybersecurity program, you have heard of some of these things. And some of them are more technical, some of them are more geared towards certain industries. Um, and they kind of go like this. It's you have to understand your requirements, like we discussed. PCI DSS, if you're going to accept electronic payments, it's a payment card industry data security standard. Or if it's HIPAA, health information, or maybe you are dealing with customers that are in Europe or globally, you run like an online retail store and you fall under GDPR, global data protection requirements, regulations, and there's all kinds of different standards. So just knowing what regulations you have to meet is the first part. Then you document your policies and your controls, because they're going to require you to protect that. So you make a policy at the governance level, the leadership level, and then you implement your controls that control and make sure that your policy is enforced. You have to repeatedly audit. It's a cyclic process. You repeatedly audit your company and you manage third-party vendor risk. A lot of these frameworks require you to look at your vendors. So for instance, if you have a vendor that has this application that you use, you need to ask them if that is secure, because if you get breached through them, that can be an issue. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail, but these are some basic things. I'm just trying to simplify it. Use a framework like CIS, NIST, or ISO. And so it would be the cybersecurity framework is something NIST CSF that businesses use. And it's a little bit more robust. If you're just trying to keep it really simple, CIS, the Center for Internet Security has some controls for you that you might be interested in. And then so you're going to map the controls. Sometimes you have different multiple regulations. And I'm going to show you an example where if you have health information and you accept electronic payments, then you fall under two different regulations. You fall under PCI DSS and HIPAA. So how do you manage that? Well, you can map the controls and basically knock two birds with one stone. So what does that look like? So PCI DSS is the payment card industry data security standard. If we look at the controls, this is a high level of the controls, secure networks and systems, protect account data, maintain a vulnerability management program, implement strong access control measures, and regularly monitor test networks. Well, these are some of the same redundant controls that are required under HIPAA. So mapping them together and seeing where the gaps are and making sure that you've covered all your bases is what I mean by cross mapping your controls. These are basic controls. They can be cross mapped. Okay. And so whenever you look at these risks, you document them all. So you document your risks, like if your IT operations go down, if there's a cyber attack, if you fail to meet the compliance of one of those frameworks, or maybe you have a vendor like we were talking about that gets breached, or you lose an employee. All these things that I've continually mentioned because I want to drive these home. These are very common things that happen. How do you meet compliance and show that you met compliance, right? If something happens, how do you say, well, this is what we've done. We've identified this and we're doing this. Well, it's called a risk register. And this is what it looks like. This is just an example I pulled off and I made really quickly. And so you have right here a risk description. Phishing attack leads to credential theft. It's high likelihood it happened. And if it does happen, it's going to impact us majorly. So it's going to be a critical risk level. And the risk response type is we're going to do something about it, because you can only mitigate, transfer, avoid, or accept a risk. And so how are we going to respond? We implemented MFA. We did security awareness training, phishing simulations, and email filtering. Who did it? The IT manager. Who's the point of contact? And what's the status? We're continually doing this. What you notice about the risk register, it says high, and critical. Well, what does that mean? And so when you have a small business, you're not really concerned with the details so much, because if you're a low maturity, meaning that you haven't really started on a security program yet, which a lot of businesses haven't. High, medium, and low, all these basic terms, they might be sufficient because you have a lot of maturing to do. But if you already have a security program running, you want to get more detailed. If you're a business owner, numbers speak to you. So the more complex that your business is, and the more complex the process of managing the risk is, you want to get more precise, like 70% likelihood of $100,000 impact happening to you. See, that's why I put the numbers on the second line here. It's a different way to manage it. So if you have a 70% likelihood of losing $100,000, but you can spend $10,000 just purchasing cyber insurance to cover the ransom, so that you can make up for that money. So now you've transferred the risk to the insurance company. You only spent $10,000 on it. So if it does happen, you're not going to lose $100,000. So that's what a risk register is just mapping your risks and documenting them and saying, look, we are doing our due diligence and protecting yourself and knowing that you have a plan for these risks. So the risk assessment process, I'm going to take you through it, and this is going to be more of the contextual. It's meaning it's related to your specific business and numbers, not high, medium, or low, but numbers, so that you can actually see and make better decisions on where you want to spend your money. I run a small business, and I'm very concerned with how I want to prioritize my budget. So that's why I like quantifying my risk. I don't need to know if it's high or yellow or red or green. I need to know how much money am I going to lose in, and what's the probability, and what can we do about it? What's the highest risk I need to spend my money on? So what we want to do, we want to look at our business, and we want to map and value our assets in business terms. For instance, if you are like a cabinet shop and you running CNC machines that are cutting out, well, the server that holds all the data for these plans, that's a very important thing. Maybe you have another server that's just running, a mundane process. If that goes down, it's not going to mean as much to you as that other server that's running all your machines. So it's more critical. So that's going to be higher in the priority to protect. And so that's kind of how you prioritize things. You want to find out what is most impactful to your business. You document it all. And then you analyze, what are the threats? Where am I vulnerable at? And we're going to go over each one of these in a little bit more detail. And then you calculate, like, that's how you come up with that 70% that this threat is going to attack that server, and it's going to cost us 20,000 to replace it. So that's what the impact would be. And then the probability is what we just talked about. And then you develop and interpret the data. So what are we going to do about it? And then you prioritize the risk, and you implement the controls, and you spend the money on the controls, and then you reassess. It's a cyclic process. So to go over this more clearly, first step, map and value assets. So has your business conducted a business impact analysis? It'll identify parts of your business that are critical to its operation, the people that are critical, the processes, the technology, the data, third parties. Maybe you guys are relying on third party for a certain material, or for an application, or for a service. Anything that's your organization is dependent upon, and obligations that you have to meet, contractual obligations to customers. You want to look at all these things, find out what's most important to your business. And by the way, knowing all this is very helpful for making your business more efficient, and in cutting fat, and in seeing where you need to spend money on your business. And this is risk. It's not just related to cyber risk. It's how to run your business efficiently, how to see everything that your business is doing and track it all. Next step, you're going to analyze your threats and your vulnerabilities. Well, some threats might not be related to your industry. So you want to find out where the specific threats to your industry are. If you're a nation state hacker, you're not really probably going after certain businesses. You're going after like governmental, critical infrastructure, other things. If you're, a hacktivist that you want to hack because of a social issue, or to bring attention to some social issues, you're going to attack different organizations. So depending on the threat actor, You want to identify who is most likely to attack you, and then where you're vulnerable for that attack. When you have this information, you can run what we call a Monte Carlo symbol, a simulation. And basically what that does is it just gives you the probability of these things happening, and then how much it costs if it does happen. And you can Google this and get like an Excel spreadsheet, and it has it all set up for you. And you basically put the numbers in, and it runs like 1,000 simulations, and then it'll tell you this is where it's most likely to happen, and that's where you get these curves, and then this is where you get the cost of this probability distribution here. So it's the probability and value of the risk happening. Once you have that information, this is where you can make your decisions. So the red curve is what you get. The red curve here, this is called a loss exceedance curve. So this is the probability. The higher the curve is, the higher the probability. And this is an example of how to use this curve. If you started out with 40% risk at $3 million, there's a 40% chance you're going to lose $3 million. And you want to know, if I buy this endpoint detection and response product and I put it on all my office computers, what am I going to get out of that? What's the return on investment? Well, you're buying down the risk 18%. So this is now your new risk level. And then the part that's high that you can't accept, you can transfer that risk and put insurance on it, and you get insurance coverage there. So that's kind of what this means. And it might seem a little complicated, but you can go back and rewatch the video, use ChatGPT or Google, and it's really an important thing to learn for your business, because once you approach from this systematic process, you can really start to see where you're going to get the most money for your investment. Because without this, you're really just guessing, and you're just throwing money into certain areas and hoping that it's going to have the impact that you want. And let's talk about set risk boundaries and thresholds. So if we go back, we look at this blue line right here. This blue line is a risk boundary. After this much risk, you're saying, I can't accept that. I need to have insurance cover that. And so how do we set those things, and what are they? So a risk appetite is the amount and type of risk you're willing to take to achieve whatever you're trying to achieve. An example of that is if you're a startup in the tech industry, you might have a high risk appetite, investing in experimental technology and to gain a dominance in the market. Well, risk tolerance is the acceptable variation of the outcomes related to that risk. So it's a between this amount and that amount of risk is okay. We can tolerate that. So for instance, while the startup that we talked about with the high risk appetite for innovation, it might only tolerate a 10% budget overrun on projects. So that's a risk. It can't go over budget on this product. So it has to stay within that 10%. Well, a risk threshold is a specific point at which it becomes unacceptable. So that's that blue line. So if that happens, then we're going to start an insurance claim. And so that's what that means. I just wanted to get some terms there so that you can start thinking in terms of business. I'm accepting this business. What is not acceptable for this risk? That, maybe this other client is too risky, or maybe this job is too risky, or maybe this project is too risky, or maybe if it's within this amount of risk, then it's acceptable. But at this point, we're not going to accept that. And when you start thinking in terms like that for your business, you can make more calculated decisions. And so we approach this thing, from a holistic, cyclic, and adaptable approach. So what I mean by that is it has to encompass your whole business. Your business is, a collective group of people that are, they're working towards a collective goal. It's a group of people working towards a collective goal. And so you have to continually steer and manage, and it takes constantly assessing and reassessing and adapting. And that's how you can manage your market. When you start small, you have different challenges. As you grow, you have different obstacles now, and it changes. Maybe the market changes. Maybe there's market trends that change how you need to, talk to your sales department, or how you need to post on social media, or what, market you need to go after. And so having a multi-year plan is very important. looking at what you're doing, so that way that you can kind of see how everything's going to play out, make better decisions. And then it's also important to understand that all this, it's all top-down governance. It means that whatever you do as a leader in your business is going to roll downhill and affect every other part in your business, which is why org behavior is so important. Creating the culture where you have the right teams and the right culture so you can, you know, retain those employees and retain the talent. The good culture means you're going to have a better efficient process, or you're going to have better quality products or services. You have to be a what's called a change agent for your business, and you have to actually be actively creating the culture that you want. And as a leader, you're the champion for that. And for cybersecurity, everybody's part of the cyber team. And be having everybody be aware of, you know, the values of your organization, the security hygiene that you require is very important, because if everybody's aware and on the same page, you're going to be more secure. We're going to take a look at why that's important, and we're going to go switching gears more into a cyber type perspective. The top attack vectors, one of them is social engineering. It's people focused. That's why culture matters so much. And I was recently talking with a global chief information security officer, and he was saying that it's very important. One of his most important things is creating the right culture. Why? Because social engineering is a huge tactic. And social engineering is using human emotion, basically manipulating humans to get something, whether it's access to a system or information. That's one of the top ways that attackers are approaching these organizations. Business email compromise, phishing emails. That's a huge thing. Stolen credentials, weak credentials, credentials without multi-factor authentication. That's a top one. Misconfigurations and vulnerabilities, not having patched systems or not hardened cloud services, not having the right professionals that know how to do it. And then also ignoring third parties. And we're going to go into that a little bit more. Third parties are a top attack vector, whether it's your software, whether it's an application that you're putting on your computer, or whether it's the janitor that you hired that comes in and sticks a USB in your computer when you're not looking or you're not at work, and you know, exfiltrate some data. And it's not just malware. It used to be that we just needed antivirus, right? Well, now malware-free activity is up to 75% in 2023. And you can see since 2019, it's been increasing, that it's not just a malware that is downloaded on your computer. It's all these different top attack vectors. The next thing is the top 5 things to secure your business. So these are all related to these top attack vectors. Keep these in mind: social engineering, business email compromise, credentials, misconfigurations, third parties. It's all geared towards that. If you can't do a whole program, which I highly recommend that you do, just focusing on these things will help you tremendously. So multi-factor authentication is going to help you protect. If someone does get your password, they still don't have another device. And there's different levels to multi-factor authentication. I recommend steering away from text messaging, and I use a YubiKey, which is just like this little hardware. It's like a little plastic piece. It can go on your keychain, and you can put it in your computer. You type in your password, and then you just like touch it with your finger, and you're in. So those are the most secure. But you know, an application like Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator, those are really helpful. Manage detection and response, and manage antivirus. These things go on your computer, and if something happens, you know, with your email, someone downloads something, clicks on the wrong link, these things are going to stop the spread, reduce the cost to your business. And they're with 24/7 MDR, managed detection and response, you have people looking at what's happening with your computer and are able to stop and respond to it. And managed antivirus is looking at behaviors and not just a signature. In the old days, they would just look at what the signature of a malware is. Instead, nowadays, there's a lot of sneaky ways that they hide. So they look at the behavior of your computer. So it's more important. Email security, huge. Business email compromise is a top attack vector. So having email security with encryption, having your SPF, DKIM, all these different configurations secured on your email is very important. Not only that, having some type of solution that can prevent with if a user clicks a link, that should be able to stop them even if it's malicious. That's good email security. You can't just rely on the user. And this is where defense in depth comes into place. You want to have multiple controls in place so that if something happens and one control fails, you have something in place. It's about focusing on multiple layers of defense. Something could happen. Nothing is ever secure. No good security professional will ever tell you that something is secure because it's a cat and mouse game. Hackers are finding their way in, and then defenders are finding a way to block them, to monitor, to alert, to block, to identify, protect, and recover. So you want to set up resilience for your business, protected backup solution. Make sure they can't get to the backups, and if something happens, you get ransomware, you can restore. You've got to have an instant response plan. What are you going to do when that happens? So these two things, 4 and 5, you want to make sure you have protected backups and you have a plan. We'll go into that a little bit more too. So focus on the data and the compliance. Compliance is going to get your business in some hot water if you are not in compliance. And the data is what they're after. So focus on protecting that, and you're going to be a more resilient business with a plan. So just plan and adjust for these things. Being aware is half the battle. We talked about org behavior and the top attack vector being the human element. And I'm gonna really harp on this because it's so important. I've seen so many leaders overlook organizational behavior. So if you're requiring all your employees or your team members to do certain things, but you don't do them, everybody has to use a work device, but you're using a personal device. It's not setting a good standard. It means that you can get away with whatever you can get away with, and that's not really a good thing to do. You want to set the standard at top that you care about this and that you're not just saying to do it, you're actually doing the same things that your policies say to do. Security culture and security tools. Security takes a combination of people, processes, and technology. The security tools, they're great, but you have to have the expertise. You have to have the expertise to know how to configure them, to use them correctly. And it won't do any good if someone circumvents it. If someone actually gets social engineered and they're allowing this attacker access to data or something, the security tools are not going to really do anything, right? So a security tool does not mean you're 100% secure. It takes defense in depth. It's a security culture and security tools together. Looking at email security, email is still the number one threat vector for cybercrime. 90% of data breaches start with a phish. Phishing campaigns are evolving with increased tactics like video, like voice through phone, through text messaging, to impersonating your brand. Make sure your email is configured where someone can't send an email representing your organization, maybe even sending it to your own employees telling you to do something. QR codes are increasing in prevalence being used in attacks. So there's a 331% increase in the QR code attacks. So 91% of active threats reported published. Healthcare, finance remain the top targeted industries with increase in malicious emails, bypassing at 84% and 118% respectively. So that just goes to show you that email is a huge thing. It's one of the number one things to protect. And I figured you guys could use a little humor. Everybody's been frustrated with these passwords. You got to change them. Your password is weak. Well, who's weak now? You want to throw the computer out the window, right? Use a password manager. You want to use a password manager. No one wants to remember all these complex passwords, but you don't want to have one password that's easy to guess, so my recommendation, and this, you take this to your personal life as well, use multi-factor authentication and use a password manager. Very cheap and very effective. let's get into third-party risk management, another top attack vector. And we're going to kind of really drive this home. 1.7 million potentially pwned. That's not a typo. That's what we call breached in the cybersecurity world after payment service provider takes a year to notice the break-in. So they didn't really have the right monitoring capabilities to even recognize it. And let's say a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, they say, well, I use QuickBooks to collect my payments, or I use this other provider to collect my payments. Well, you still have to send them like a questionnaire or ask them or do some due diligence in making sure that they're actually secure. Otherwise, you still have responsibility. It's right inside the PCI DSS regulations that you have to do that. And we'll talk about Kronos. Kronos is an organization that does payroll, and they do payroll. And we had a client that used Kronos, and they got breached, and no one could pay their employees. Pepsi used Kronos, and they couldn't pay their employees. Well, Pepsi's employees, their labor union, they sued Pepsi millions of dollars because they couldn't pay their employees. Well, was that on their risk register? We don't know, because if you didn't have a backup plan for if your one of your service providers goes, south, and you're trying to still fulfill your obligations, well, you could actually get sued for that. So it's really important to understand third-party risk. It's a top attack vector. Thinking about it more in a cyber perspective, software supply chain security. How many applications do we put on our phones? How many applications do we have on our computers? Or how many applications do we allow access to our cloud? These are things to think about because they're involved. Anytime you get a new solution, there should be a process in place. You should, before you go out and you procure the solution, talk with your IT folks, talk with your team, make sure that like this is a secure application, make sure that it's going to do the job that you need it to do, and it's going to be easy to use. Talk to the users, talk to all your stakeholders, and it's going to come out much better. And be aware of the risk associated with them. One of the things we do is we send out a vendor security questionnaire asking what their security practices are like, so we can get a picture of what they do for their security practices. Make sure it's in your contracts that that they're doing the right thing and that they're responsible for X, Y, and Z. You bake it into your contracts. Ask for security documentation. There's a thing called SOC 2 report, and what that is basically a third party comes out, assesses an organization, and then writes in a testament, like basically a test to their security hygiene and posture. And there's different types of them. Some just say, yeah, they have these controls. And then some, like a SOC type 2, will say these controls are in place and they're operating effectively for them to meet all their obligations. So there's different levels of it. But you want to ask for these type of things. Some organizations have what's called a trust center. And a trust center is a place where you can get documentation, and it shows their security hygiene and their maturity ahead of time. So you just go there and you can get access to that and you can see it because they're being proactive, and that's a really good sign when they have a trust center. Moving forward into it a little bit more, API attack surge 3000. Cybersecurity needs to evolve. Okay, well, what is an API? It's basically an application interface. If you allow an application, like for instance, a lot of small and medium-sized businesses use Microsoft 365, and then you want to use this other application, this solution, so you allow it access in. Well, it's most likely, communicating through an API. It's getting access. What does that mean? Well, that means it has an identity. It has to get access, but it's not a real identity of a person or a user. It's a service, and it's called a non-human identity. And what are they, and how are we going to secure them? So let's take a look at what these are. Non-human identities are APIs, tokens, service accounts. These are things like the apps that you use, like we just spoke about. Backups. Maybe your backup solution has access into your computers, into your server, into your cloud, and they're backing these things up, and they're doing it through an API or another service. They do jobs. They're apps, backups, and other services that do jobs, and they have an identity, but it's just not a human identity. And they're increasing as an attack vector. So that's something to think about, and maybe put some controls in place that, anything getting added to your systems needs to be authorized. You need to take a look at that. Another thing that's happening right now, the AI revolution, right? There's tons of AI um, products out there right now, and I think that businesses would be smart to utilize it, but to do so in a way that's more secure, that reduces risk. So if everybody knows what Chat GPT is, or Grok, or there's all these different types of learning language models and other AI that's baked into these things. And so going back, talking about third parties, a lot of times you got to ask them if they have AI in their product, because what's happening is this AI is training on your data. And if you have certain regulatory obligations like HIPAA information and things like that, you don't want your team uploading sensitive information into these things, because what happens is they can get trained on them, and then another business is using that same application and they ask it a question, it can spit out your business's information. Or you know OpenAI is what created ChatGPT, and they've already had a few different breaches. So if you upload information in there, it'd be wise to redact any sensitive information. Don't ever load sensitive information up into one of these AI products. Make sure you create a policy and that your staff knows about the policy and acknowledges it. Make sure they have the right training. Make sure you implement good data loss prevention. There's a lot of different tools out there to make sure that you know where your data is, who has access to it, and you control it. Just make sure that you review all the privacy policies of any of the AI tools that you're using. It's very important, because everybody's racing to the latest greatest thing, but there are risks that come along with that. And just to make sure you protect yourself, I think it's important to take a look at these things. One of the most important things is documentation. And we spoke about this earlier whenever we were talking about the risk assessment. The reason why we're documenting things is because there's a whole bunch of reasons why, right? Because most people don't know what they have. You don't know how many computers you have, mobile devices. You don't know where your data's at, what data you have. You don't really know exactly all the processes you have. If you don't know all these things, you can't protect the data. You can't protect your systems. You're exposed, and you can't streamline your processes. If you don't document them, then how do you know if they're like inefficient and you can save money on them? So there's a lot of reasons I can go on about documentation. It's one of the things that I'm a stickler about. If something's changed, if you have good change management process, it's going to be documented, because if someone else comes in there and has to take over a job, maybe you have a new employee, they can be trained, you can reduce training time because you have documentation. Or maybe you want to know who changed this configuration in my firewall or my router or my server. Well, if you have a documentation on your change log, it'll show you. Another thing is, if you need to respond to an incident, how does the incident responder know what's happening, or what your network looks like, what they're dealing with? If you don't have logs enabled, make sure that you have your logs enabled so that people can look at that and respond to an incident. And also they understand the network and how to minimize the impact, or even see what the impact is. It's also helpful when you're changing providers. Maybe you have one IT service provider and you change to another. Well, it's going to cost, they're going to charge you. They're going to charge you to go in and figure out what your network, they have to do an assessment and assess your network and your endpoints and figure out what they're even working with. If you have documentation, you can say, this is what we have. It's very easy. If you want to sell your business and you have good documentation, and it allows them to see how your business runs, and any risk associated with it. There is a story about Yahoo getting bought by Verizon, and Yahoo had a data breach, and because of that data breach, they lost a lot of money in that acquisition. So there's a lot of things that can happen with that, and it also is required for compliance. So when you assess risk, there's a lot that you can do, but you have to document it, because if something happens, it's required for the compliance, but it's also, if something happens, you can basically be covered. And you're saying, look, we have these controls in place. We have it all documented right here. Moving into cyber insurance. A lot of SMBs, you guys don't have the means to do all these robust security controls. So you want to transfer your risk to cyber insurance. And we have, when we talk about insurance, we have all different types of insurance, right? Life insurance, health insurance, car insurance. We have, all these different types of insurances, and we don't ever expect to use them. We hope we don't have to use them. And it's the same thing with cyber insurance. We hope we never have to use it, but it's much cheaper to respond to an incident if you have cyber insurance. Usually, cyber insurance will come with incident responders, it'll come with a legal team. And it's important to know that what your coverage is. Make sure you have the proper cyber coverage. A lot of times there's exclusions in them, like data loss from hardware failures, like your server goes down, insider threats, third party liability, nation state hacker or wartime exclusions. There's a lot of different exclusions. So make sure you go through your policy and you look at what's excluded and what's covered, and make sure you have the proper coverage. Make sure you know what the claims process is. Like I said, a lot of times they have partners and they'll have third-party partners, and they'll come in the middle of an incident and they're saying, hey, I am the incident responder for so-and-so insurance company. And you're like, are you an attacker? Who are you? Make sure you know who they're working with ahead of time. You know what your claims process is, your incident response process is, and all the third-party partners. Few things to know about cyber insurance, which I highly recommend. And just to kind of give you little details about like actionable intel of what you can do if you get a data breach or a cyber attack. A lot of people don't know this, and it can really help you isolate your affected systems by disconnecting the network. um, if you turn off the computer, there's working memory in it that goes away every time you turn off your computer. So sometimes it's appropriate, but if you disconnect it from the network, it can prevent it from spreading to other computers. It can prevent it from talking to a command and control server that attackers are running. So that's one of the things. And a lot of this is contextual. So this is general information. You notify your team, your IT team, your IT service provider, notify them immediately because time is important. And you assess the damage, determine the scope and nature of the breach, how big of a situation it is, what happened. That's most likely going to be done by engaging experts, contacting cybersecurity and other professionals like Manasec, your insurance company. And then you have certain types of timelines for different regulations. You got to notify authorities and affected parties for compliance reasons. Then document and learn. Is because you recover is not the end. Everything is cyclic, right? You've got to look at what went wrong, how can we prevent that from happening, and how was our response? Was it a quality response? Can we improve that? So looking at lessons learned, how do we improve that situation for the next time? Challenges and solutions. Limited budget. A lot of small and medium-sized businesses, as we discussed, they can't go hire a chief information security officer and a couple people for their security operations center and this whole team. And that's why managed service providers are very important. And there's different types of contracts. Some operate on break fix, some have like an annual contract and they handle it all for you. They just manage it all for a monthly cost. Lack of expertise, we just cover that. Provide employee training and outsource specialists. So train your employees on your team members on security hygiene, on different other risks that you see during your risk assessment, and make sure that you get specialists that only when you need them to save money, right? Evolving threats, staying up to date on risks is important. That's why we continually assess, because we want to know if maybe we're out of compliance or maybe the software is vulnerable and it's increasing risk. So when we continually assess and we document that, we're going to stay ahead of the game. We identify their new tactics. We just want to stay ahead of everything. Third-party risk, we talked about that. Use vendor risk management practices with that vendor security questionnaire. Asking questions and documenting it all is going to be very important. And so hopefully, to recap, we went over assessing the risk. We went over the top 5 attack vectors and some information around each of those things. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to send them our way. Be happy to answer any of those questions for you. It's important to invest some time and to kind of take it by the horns and lead instead of be reactive. It's going to be much cheaper to be proactive than reactive. So appreciate everyone tuning in. Your security is our priority. If you need to get a hold of us, visit manasec.com or call us at 916-597-1002. And then I'm going to leave some resources if you want to learn about some of these frameworks and requirements, so that way that you can implement a really good, robust risk management program.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gabe. Yeah, there's a lot of really good information in there. And yeah, and we will send people your way and yeah, thank you so much.